Okay, and here we are now with the boom installed. Just make sure, first we're going to start with these pretty loose. Make sure you just wiggle it in there with the indentations facing the sides and lined up with, in the boom block there's these little indentations that come out, and those are going to line up with the indents on the boom. So you might have to wiggle a little bit just to get those to line up and push it through. I recommend taking the motor off for two reasons. First of all, you're going to have to remove it to put this belt on later anyways. So I've got that off, and also you can look in here and make sure when you push the boom in that you line it up perfectly with the end of this block here. Otherwise, you know, if you push it too much or not enough, you're going to have some issues there. So that way you can line it up and make sure that you push it to the right length. I just tightened the top two quite a little bit. I might have to loosen it up so that I can push it through to give slack to the belt to get the main shaft or the main gear assembly on later. That may or may not be the case. We'll just see when we get to that step. But we'll just remember that these are loose for now and that we're going to have them tightened before we finish up all the way. Put the tail boom through, twisted the belt, quarter turn to the left. If you pull here on this side, on the right side, you'll see that the tail will go clockwise. If you pull on the left side of the frame, you'll see that the tail will go counterclockwise. And that's the direction we're going to have it going when it's running. It will be turning this way, turning the gear that way. So that's correct. Just make sure you don't have any twists or anything in there. So keep track that it's straight and that it's just twisted 1/4 twist to the left. Next part we're going to move on to, we've got this bag, step 49. It's got a little main shaft collar. So we're going to put that on the main shaft. Don't forget thread lock, and to clean off that screw I'm going to go back and do that. There's also one side of the collar has this little indentation sticking out where the other side is completely flat and flush. See how we don't have it on that side and we do on this side? Well, this indentation, when it goes on, it's going to be facing down towards the bearing block. So the smooth side is what you're going to want to put up onto the main shaft. So we're going to put that on there, get that slid in here. We'll have to put the main gear in there as well. This is all ready to go. Open up the belt, get that all set up, and we'll be back once we're all ready to do that. Put this belt on there. Obviously you got to remove that motor for that part, so make sure you get the whole motor assembly off. We'll put this in here, then we'll show putting the main gear and the main shaft and everything on there. It's kind of a lot of steps all at once, so I'll do those and then I'll show you here all the details once it's all done. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit into the explanation here of what we're doing. We've got this top belt on here now. So we just run this main belt through the top here. We're just going to let it sit. Take the belt on the bottom and we're just going to push it down because right now it's going to get in the way when we're trying to get the main shaft in. So we're just going to leave that down there facing in the direction that we know it's supposed to be. Leave this belt here. Then, I know this is a little tricky, we're going to run the main shaft through on the top and see how that's still nice and really smooth, falls under its own weight. If it's not doing that, go back and adjust all your screws to make sure that that's nice and smooth. And with this belt came a washer. We've got this washer, so we've got this washer right here. We're going to slide this up onto the main shaft here from underneath. So we're going to back this up, put that washer on there, and while this washer is on here, we're going to try not to let it fall off. We're going to move this main belt up, put the main gear in there, slide it on and get it to where the shaft can go here through the hub. and then we're going to take the bottom belt and pull that up over this one, and then after that we're going to put the motor on and attach it on the top belt. So just make sure you don't forget this washer, put that thing in there, and don't let it fall out while you're working on the step. So it's a little tricky getting this whole thing set up. It's probably going to save you guys the effort of watching me fondle my way through it, but I'll let you know. This is how they describe it in the manual, though. It should be simple enough to work this main shaft up in there, but it might take me a couple tries, and that little spacer washer right here might fall out a couple times, so make sure it doesn't fall off by pushing this shaft up too far. So we'll give this a shot, see how it goes. This is probably going to be a little bit tricky, but then after this should be smooth sailing from that point on. Alright, now we've got the main gear installed in here. Still haven't put the motor back on yet, but the way I recommend doing that, just put this main belt on this top part of the gear first. Just put it on there, push this belt to the bottom, and then push this in. What I wanted to do was I used gravity to make sure that this washer didn't fall out, because it did actually fall out once or twice when I tried, just sideways. So I put it on there, slid the main gear in while the whole thing was upside down. That worked out pretty well. It was kind of tricky getting in here because there's kind of a small gap for accessing that bolt, just to get the Jesus bolt here through the shaft. So lining that up with that sleeve was a bit of a pain. I found once I got it on, I got the Jesus bolt through after lining up those holes. Had to access through this small slot just to get the nylon locking nut in, but I couldn't hold it tight enough to screw it, so I came in again through the bottom, and I was able to hold it here and then tighten it so I could get it tight enough up against the whole collar that is in there. You don't want to over tighten it. If you over compress it, you can cause things to warp. Then next part, pulled this belt up over here. What I did was on this left side, pulled it up over, actually I did it upside down, pulled it up over the right side, pushed it through, and then from the other side, while I was holding it, I grabbed it with my needle nose pliers here. So what I did was went in there, grabbed it, and then twisted a little bit more as it came through, and then it snapped level, and then a few more twists, and it kind of works down to the bottom of that little shaft or gear. So here we are with both the belts on. Just need to put the motor back in. So I'm going to have to compress this here. Yeah, so a little tricky with all the wires and stuff. Pull this out, push this whole pulley system forward. So I'm going to push that forward and then get the motor in through this collar and get this belt around the pinion here that is on it. So this looks like it might actually be a bit of a tricky thing. Take a couple of tries, but make sure you're pushing this whole thing forward so that you can get it on. Okay, so here we are, and after much ado, I finally have this full assembly here ready to go. Just have a couple of things to note for you guys. Got both the belts, everything on here. Getting the motor mount on is pretty easy, but there's a lot of ways that you can kind of make it difficult for yourself. The boom, but it actually will go past the length of the block inside there. I thought it was getting stopped basically by the block that was holding these pulleys, but it wasn't. There's actually just a longer slit in there, so make sure, you know, I went in there, I double checked. It doesn't move. It was getting stopped basically by all of these little indentations and slits here in the boom and the block, so it will actually go a little bit further underneath this motor than the boom block. Also, if you tried to make it flush with the boom block, there would be way too much tension in this bottom belt here. So that being said, when you're putting this on, when you do this whole process, you're going to want to move this whole thing forward and back to adjust the tension on this top belt. So if you have all of these tightened, then it's going to make it very difficult to move all of this, because it's like you pull it out and the tension pulls on these pulleys, and then it makes it difficult to move the whole mechanism. So make sure these are loosened just enough. You're going to tighten all these 4 tail boom block screws at the end. So make sure that's loose. Even with this bottom belt on here, it's pretty easy just to slide the motor in there with the pinion. The trickiest part was the fact that trying to hold this belt and make sure none of the tension got into the front so that all of the tension went to the rear was a little bit tricky, but get all of that pressed back, and then just hold it here on the back part of this. Push your motor mount in there, push it forward a little bit, get in front of the belt, push it down, push it back, and then make sure you align that shaft with the lower bearing in the block here that has the pulleys. Put it in there. There's also, if you push it forward, there's quite a bit of, it's pretty loose here. If you push it back, there's quite a bit of tension, and it says in the manual more tension is better than less. So you're going to push it back almost the whole way. What I did was I pushed it back, kind of tightened a couple screws, just enough to where I could push on the belt just a little bit and shift it forward just a little. So it was all the way back and then forward just a little bit. And then I've got just a nice comfortable amount of tension here. It's not too much, because if I pulled it back all the way, it seemed like it was too much and it was going to put quite a bit of load on the motor, and I didn't want too much of a load, so just a little bit of stuff there. You don't want it to be too loose as well. If you push it forward, it's going to be way too loose. So it's going to be back and then forward just a little bit, and whatever you're comfortable with, and whatever you think your ESC can handle as far as the extra load. So once you put that on there, and you've adjusted the tension on this belt, screw all these screws in, get them nice and tight, and then pull the boom back, maybe just a little bit, adjust the tension on this lower belt. It doesn't have to be too much, same sort of tension. Basically, you're good to go, because once you push this forward and you have the boom inside of these blocks, as far forward as it'll push, that's kind of the perfect tension here. Once that's all together, just tighten these. Don't go too tight on this boom block. I notice it gets pretty tight pretty quick. I think there's even going to end up being like a really tiny gap in between. So don't over tighten these screws. One, because you don't want to compress all of this plastic, but 2, you also don't want to put too much compression on the tail boom. And I think if you over tighten these, you could easily put a whole bunch of compression on that tail boom and kind of push on it, and that might degrade the performance or cause it to rub up against the belt or something. So you don't want to do that. This is the finished product. Everything looks good. Move the motor this way. It causes head to go clockwise, tail to go counterclockwise, and it doesn't feel like there's too much load on the motor, where if I pull this whole mechanism back enough, and also if I pull the tail boom back enough to put a bunch of tension on the bottom belt, then there's just way too much of a load here on the motor. So make sure you're comfortable with that, and just make sure you don't tighten all of this stuff first, trying to get the boom flush, and then making it so you can't move this whole motor mechanism. You'll just be creating problems for yourself. So loosen all of these, get this tight, get this tight, get these tight, and then you'll be good to go. Alright, now that we have almost a complete looking helicopter here, it's time to mount some electronics before we put all these servo arms and everything on here. So we're going to put our Icon flybarless and our Castle ESC on there. Would have gone for a Scorpion, but they didn't have one in the 6 cells, so I'm going to, as it recommends in the manual, put the ESC in here and put the Icon on top. There is a 5 amp built-in BEC. Once I plug everything in, I'm going to do some tests and make sure I don't get any brownouts with the situation, and if I do, I've got a CC 10 amp ESC that I can, or BEC that I can run. Try that out. If not, I'll get something else that's beefier. Just make sure that you have enough current for your servos to be able to handle it without getting brownouts. So we'll go over that stuff just a little bit more later towards the end, but right now we're going to just get these things mounted, and it looks like I have some soldering to do. I've got EC3 connectors for this whole setup, and then I've got the bullet connectors that came with my motor, so I've got to solder those guys on there. I'm going to pop this off the top, probably this carbon fiber plate, put the ESC in there, get that mounted, and then put that back on top and get the Icon flybarless system mounted, and we'll move on at that point. Probably about time to do some programming here. So as far as programming on these things, I've got another video out that shows how to program the Icon flybarless system, so see my channel for that. I'm not going to go into all of the specifics on how I'm setting that stuff up here. That's kind of a separate video, and it really depends on the flybarless system that you choose to use. You might have BeastX or V-Bar or something else, and everything basically will be described in there on the mechanics, making sure everything's 50-50, checking the positive pitch, negative pitch, directions, and all that stuff. If you have questions on that, just look into the details about your flybarless controller and research how those controllers and all the mechanics work if you have questions on that. Same thing with the Castle ESC. I've got a video on my channel that shows how to program some Castle ESCs. Not this one particular, some HV120 I believe, but the concept is the same. Basically, you get a Castle link and hook it up, and that's what I'll do, get that stuff all done, but I'm not going to go over those details here. So as far as programming all these electronics and everything, that will not be a part of the video. Those will be kind of separate subjects by themselves. So right now we're just going to go over mounting, and we'll show you how everything looks once it's mounted and we start routing some wires and everything. So we'll come back and show you all that stuff once it's all ready to go. Okay, and now at this point we've got the ESC installed. I put some hook and loop Velcro, basically took this top carbon fiber thing off, put that on there so it was steady. I might put like a little another strap on this whole thing. Got the flybarless controller in here. I've got with all the wires facing forward. Should be easy to access everything here between the Gov, which I'm not sure if I'm going to use at this point, and the satellites. Might use one, might use two. We'll see. So that is this whole thing ready to go. Next step, you'll have a bag with step 56 through 59, or 56, 57, and 59, which will have these 3 ball links. So the one for the elevator servo, which is longer, and it also has this Delrin cover on top of it, and then these other 2 small ones. Looks like in the manual it says 57.5 millimeters from one end of the ball links to the other on this one, and 45 millimeters from one end to the other on these ones. says they're factory installed. I actually had to tighten mine a little bit. For this longer one, I probably had to go in 3 or 4 turns, and then a bit more on these two. So I just made sure I was using my calipers and measuring it up to what they say in the manual. So if you do that, you should be good to go. Hopefully we won't have to adjust these anymore later, but those are ready to go. We're going to put those on the servos, line up the servo arms. That's part of the whole fly barless setup. I'm going to make sure that this is mid-stick before I put those carbon fiber arms on here. So I've got those carbon fiber arms here ready to go that we built during that step with well, the plastic arms with the carbon fiber reinforcements. So we'll put those on here during the setup of the fly barless unit, and that looks like it's basically the next step is putting these guys on here, these two on the elevator or aileron servos, this on the elevator servo, lining it up with the icon, making sure you have the swatch nice and level, all that stuff. So that's all a part of the whole setup of the fly barless unit. We will do that, have this all done and put together and ready to go before we show you the helicopter again after we've got this whole thing programmed. So got some work here to do, going through the programming, setting this stuff up. Want to try to make sure I have the arms on here as close to 90 degrees, very little sub trim or anything necessary to try to get it level whenever possible, but that is all available in the programming of the unit that I have. So if it's off a little bit, I can change the sub trim and change one servo at a time to make sure everything's level, and then go from there with the plus or minus on my pitch throw. So we will do that and come show you the whole finished product once that controller is programmed. Okay, and here we've done a lot of work to this now, obviously. We put on all these ball links, measured everything out when we did the fly barless programming. I did all the wiring, everything's all ready to go. This one's actually ready to do a test hover as it is right now. I haven't hovered it yet, but I'll go over some notes here. Just make sure, you know, as always, try to get these arms, these horns, as straight 90 degrees as possible. Use some sub trim. If you have to use too much, then you probably should adjust where it is. All that in the 50-50 setup of your fly barless controller. One thing that was particularly annoying here, one thing that was kind of annoying was getting this control arm on the elevator servo in there. See, so what I found was the best way to do it. Take this elevator ball link and take the arm, just put the ball link onto the servo, and then it's going to be kind of tricky, but you got to basically from in here work it in there, and then you can kind of move the belt so it can push down a little more. So then you'll have that whole assembly, and then you can push it up here through the control guide from underneath. So then you'll have basically that, and then you'll connect that on the ball link. So you'll have that dangling there, and then you'll have to, at center pitch, at 50-50, so that everything's level. Then that's when you put the control arm on, and you want to try to put that as level as possible as well. It's a bit tricky. I tried a couple different ways trying to get it on there at first. You can't really take the motor off because you've got the belt and it's holding the belt on. I guess if you want to take that off and put the servo arm on there and then put the belt and everything back on again, that's an option. But got that on there. It wasn't too bad once I actually got the whole assembly in here, let it drop down low enough to line up so I could push it up in here, click it on that, push my finger in here, put that on, make sure it's 50-50, and everything was good. So also don't forget to put the screws in there in the arms. If you start flying and you haven't put these servo arms in there and they're screwed on and they've got blue thread lock, you're going to be sorry. Same with the tail servo. It was a little tricky reaching in here. That's what I did. Push my finger in here, put on some pressure, and then get the screw in there and then screw it down. Lining up with the tail, I had to actually screw this in. There was supposed to be that 2mm gap. For mine, when I wanted a really straight alignment on my servo, I had to screw those in on the gaps. Didn't have to over tighten it or anything, but it was just a little too long. It ended up having too much throw, and my endpoints were really messed up on my flybarless controller. So I tightened those because I didn't want to move the servo horn and have it off and then have non-linear response on my tail. So just make sure that's all moving nice and smooth, but there's nothing mechanical holding up that assembly. I've got everything nice and tight. Got the battery on here. As far as wiring, you can see I wired this servo down here. This one came straight down along the side. Everything I did on the outside of the frame. Not a whole lot of room here in a 450 or a smaller helicopter. I had really long satellite cables, but I put 2 satellites on here. Get a little redundancy. Nothing wrong with having a little redundancy on the signal. Same here, routed the wires for the motor back, routed the servo around underneath the mainframe, everything towards the front, and just strapped everything with zip ties. I don't have this strap on the flybarless controller very tight. It's actually really loose. It's just kind of support that I'm using to make sure some of the wires are hanging in. Same thing with the zip tie. It's pretty loose. I don't want wires bouncing up, hitting the blades. Probably not likely. I just don't want to, more than anything, get it into like the main gear or something. So that's the helicopter. It's looking pretty good, and I'm just going to give it one little go over, check everything, make sure everything's tight. Go through the manual, check all the parts, make sure nothing's missing. You may, if you have a different servo, have to put a spacer, an extra spacer in there. And it looks like they have a couple extra of these small spacers that you can put in there. You just want to make sure that when you look at it from the back, let's see if I can get this, that it's nice and level. So here we are. So it's kind of hard. I got a little bit of an angle on it, but that's nice and straight. And it even said in the manual, using the DS92A servos, the MKS servos, that I wasn't going to have to, and I'd be good with that spacer. You also might have one that's too long. You may have to trim the existing spacer down. So whatever you have to do, just make sure this is straight, or you're going to get some strange behavior on your elevator. And that's kind of a pain, because you kind of have to pull a lot of the frame out. So hopefully you don't have to deal with that. Hopefully you just went with the MKS servos and you're good to go with the stock spacer. So there we are. We're going to take a look at the canopy now in just a minute. There's one little bag of hardware for that, and we'll put that all together and show you the canopy when it's all done, and then the whole helicopter once it's finished up. Alright, now moving on to the canopy. I got mine all set up and ready to go. Got the grommets on here. The holes were actually really small. I could not get those grommets in, so I took some scissors and just kind of reamed it out just a little bit. It doesn't take a whole lot. Made the hole a little bit bigger, and then I was able to press it through, and it's still a really tight fit. It never hurts to put a little CA on the inside just to make sure it doesn't move around. Not in the hole, but around the outside, so it doesn't go anywhere. It's always nice to put a little bit of oil in the hole just to make sure. It'll keep those kind of moist enough so that they'll last longer. Same on the other side. Got my Scorpion sticker on there, of course. That looks really awesome on this color scheme. I really like this canopy. I think the color scheme's awesome. We also have the mount for the canopy. I had to drill holes in the bottom of this mount. It didn't have the holes in it already. The screws are semi-self-tapping. Once you get the holes in there, you can screw them through. But yeah, I just took my Dremel tool, little hole. After I had lined it up with the holes here, the holes were in the canopy, and then drilled through, got those nice and tight. So that part, when you put it on, is going to end up lining up with this on the helicopter. So canopy's all finished up. Looks like a good way to put it on is to, I think I get more success when I try to line up the canopy mounts first, get those on. There might be a little bit of tension pushing forward on these. That seems to be typical with what a lot of guys are seeing. And then on the bottom I'll line this guy up. So there we go. Lined up on the bottom there. Looks really good. It's in the canopy on top. And there we are. It's the Compass Warp 360 RC helicopter, and it's ready to go. Okay, and here we are, guys. One full quick look at the Warp 360 RC helicopter. It's all ready to go, ready to fly, do its maiden. Really slick looking helicopter here. Scorpion power. Alright, ready to go.